I did it. What did I do? Remember when I said this in a previous episode? I've determined that it is one of these Ordnance Department watches I want to consider for my collection. Well, I was able to get a very nice example of a vintage World War II military Ordnance Department watch. Stay tuned to this episode of Adventures with Time as I highlight my search and review the watch I obtained. After 3 years of collecting watches, I had decided I wanted to make my first purchase of a vintage watch. Now, I've had a few vintage watches that have been passed down to me, but actually buying a vintage watch was something about which I've been very wary. How does one ensure they're getting an original watch that doesn't have some hidden issue? How do you know that you're paying a fair price? And first, what type of vintage watch should I pursue? If you watched my previous video, you will have heard my rationale for narrowing down my selection from vintage to vintage military, to World War II military watch, to a model that might have been used by my father, and finally down to the watches specified and produced for the Ordnance Department, so-called ORD Department watches. I'll leave a link to that episode at the end of this video. And if this type of content interests you, please subscribe to this channel and ring that bell icon so you're alerted whenever I post a new video. With my target identified, I began my research into the specific watch models for which to search, and more importantly, their specifications, such that I can increase the likelihood of buying an authentic watch. My search on various watch buying venues was for a World War II ORD Department watch. eBay offered the greatest number of sale listings. Virtually every day, a new watch was offered from Elgin and Waltham, and to a lesser extent by Bulova and Hamilton. I pretty much ignored the Bulova watches as they didn't have the maker's name on the dial, simply a preference on my part. I saw several of the different types of ORD Department watches, that is, with different grade designations. These grades, along with the serial numbers, were inscribed on the case back of each watch. So in reviewing each watch offered for sale, my first step was to compare the two-letter designation with the information on the movement. For example, an OF grade watch needed to use a movement that had an appropriate number of jewels. Also, if the grade specified a waterproof case, the case should have the correct case back and movement cover. Often I had to ask the seller for pictures of these elements because they weren't included in the original listing. Other attributes to scrutinize were the hands, case finish, and crown. For me, the crown was the most difficult to attribute as authentic, as I'm not sure what the correct crown would have looked like. And I saw different crowns on what was supposed to be the same watch grade. I was concerned with overall condition of the watch. I wanted a nice dial and hands with an age appearance, not refinished in any way. A worn case, but one that did not have excessive damage. And of course, a watch that was in running condition and not extremely inaccurate. So I'd always ask the seller how much time the watch lost or gained within a day. My thoughts are to not have the watch service for the first year or so that I own it. I want to make sure that this is a watch I want to keep in my collection, and servicing might cost as much as the purchase price of that watch. I was not concerned about what strap or bracelet came with the watch, as I was fairly sure I would find a new strap for the watch. And price was a consideration. So I monitored the prices realized for many of these watches to see what the going rate was. But of course, with the huge variety of grades and conditions of these watches, the prices tended to range from about $200 all the way up to $400 or $500. During the 3 months I searched, I saw many ORD Department watches offered. Some broken or damaged, and some offered for repair or for parts, meaning that one would buy the watch to salvage the parts to fix some other watch. I also saw watches whose movements didn't match the grade specification on the case back, and watches that had excessive wear or discoloration that was beyond my liking. And of course, watches that sold for higher prices than I was willing to pay. I knew, given the large quantity of watches being offered, that I would eventually be able to purchase a watch without compromising my criteria. Even though these watches are about 75 years old, by the sheer number that were produced, there are still many that survived and available for purchase. It was just a matter of looking and waiting. And during my search, I did reach out to a few sellers and other collectors who gave me some valuable insight to these watches and what to look out for. So I thank them in advance. And of course, I'd like your input in the comments below about some of the questions I have on the watch I purchased and what you think about it. Okay, let's take a close look at the watch I purchased. Let me get this box open, take a look at the watch. So my first impression is that this is a fairly clean watch given its age. Seems to match the photos that were in the sale listing. The case has some obvious signs of wear, but nothing that distracts from its looks. The dial has aging, but it's quite legible with some discoloration, but that just adds to the character of the watch. And I'm not sure if the original dial color was cream like this, or if this dial has patinaed a bit. Either way, I think it has an appealing look, and the numerals and railroad tracks are still full on both the main and subdials. So that's nice. The hands are a little corroded, but fully intact and with a slightly darker paint to them than the dial. According to the maintenance manual, the hour numerals and all three hands were coated with radium luminous material. I'll check later to see if there's any luminescence left on them. Now, two aspects that I'm curious about is whether the hands and crown are original to the specific watch. Again, looking at the manual, it shows a different handset for the Elgin watch and implies a different, thinner crown. Take a look at the handset information in the maintenance manual for all four watch manufacturers. The hour and minute hand seem to match those specified for a Hamilton watch. The second hand doesn't match any of those specified in the manual, so that's a mystery. I imagine during or after the war, when one of these watches was taken in for service, the watchmaker used whatever parts they had on hand or whatever they could scrounge up, even substituting parts like hands from similar watches. That may also be true for this crown. In any case, given the overall appearance of this watch is fitting with the watches of this era and type, I'm okay with how it stands now. I'm not looking to make this watch 100% parts accurate, rather just authentic looking. Before we move to the caseback and movement, let's examine the strap. Now, I'm told by the seller that this is an original Elgin band with Bakelite hardware. He further stated that these Bakelite variants didn't last long as they were prone to breaking under combat conditions, so they switched to metal hardware. According to the seller, this information came from a friend of his who has a large amount of material and information on the watches of this era, so it seems reasonable, but again, I'll take it with a grain of salt. This NATO type strap certainly looks original and is a nice pairing with this watch. Unfortunately, the strap, with an overall length of 8 inches, is too short for my 7 7/8 inch wrist. I could try some sort of extension to make it fit my wrist, but I think that would destroy the historical accuracy of the strap and simply wouldn't look correct. What I'm thinking now is to get a Bund strap. Getting a Bund strap would increase the size appearance of this watch to something appropriate for my wrist. This watch measures only 30.7 millimeters wide, 34.2 with the crown. That's a bit small for my wrist. I'm thinking a bund strap that has a pad width of around 39 millimeters would make this watch look bigger on my wrist and still look natural. I've had a strap maker mock up what this would look like in preparation for my order. What do you think about this with the leather in a chestnut color? I think it'll look pretty good. Let me take the strap off and get at the case back. This watch is grade OF, which, as you remember, means the movement has between 15 and 17 joules and has a waterproof case. So let's open it up and take a look to see which movement is included with this watch and if it's appropriate. Unscrewing the case back shows that we have a case made by Keystone in base metal. And then looking under that, we have a rubber gasket that provides some protection or waterproofness. And then this shield, which not only covers the back of the movement, but is thick enough to go down and protect the sides of the movement. My assumption is that this is some sort of anti-magnetic shield to keep the movement and the watch from getting magnetized. So that's a nice little feature. So here it is, the Elgin 554 movement with 15 joules. And I looked this up in several databases of Elgin watch movements. Based on the serial number, this watch dates to 1943. It's a nice looking movement and doesn't seem to have any visible corrosion. So far, so good, but let me close it up to keep any dirt from getting in. The last thing to check is how this watch performs. I gave it a full wind and let it run until it ran out of power. The watch ran a total of 52.5 hours. Not bad at all. I checked the accuracy periodically. After 12 hours, it had gained 10 seconds, so an accuracy of plus 20 seconds a day. I checked it at 24 hours, and in total, it was only 5 seconds fast. So during the second 12-hour period, it was running an equivalent of minus 10 seconds a day. I was also able to check it at 45 hours, and it was a total of 5 seconds slow. That means over the last 24 hours, it was running slow by about 10 seconds a day. I guess as the spring runs down, the watch starts to lose a little time. So I checked the lume, and there doesn't seem to be any luminescence left. But what do you expect after, 75 years? Almost 80? All in all, I'm quite pleased with the performance of this watch and with its overall appearance. As I stated in previous videos, this is not a watch I'll wear too often. It's intended to be a remembrance and honor to my father who served in World War II in the Pacific Theater. I think with a new strap, it will meet that goal very nicely. Tell me, what do you think of the watch and my plans for it? And for those of you who have experience with vintage watches, does this watch appear to be representative of the style and condition of watches used during World War II? Do you see any major irregularities with it? Thanks for watching, and here's my previous video on military watches, and my recent video where I showed just pictures of watches that I've taken. This was a fun video to create, but it doesn't appear to be getting the views I expected. So check it out and let me know what you think about it.